Zambia is quite a large country located in the southern part of Africa. One of the continent's biggest rivers, the Kafue, flows through its territory, stretching as long as 979 miles. That's an incredible natural gift for an African country, which is why more than half of Zambia's 20 million population lives within the river's basin. The reasons for living here are pretty obvious. The Kafue River provides for some of the continent's most essential needs. Its water is used for irrigation and fishing, meaning it feeds people. The river is also crucial for generating electricity. Zambia has built its hydropower plants there, and of course it serves the most basic purpose of all, giving people water to drink. Looks like there might be trouble with that now because of China. This Asian country actively working in Africa has caused an environmental disaster, turning the waters of the Kafue into poison. Well, time to figure out what China's up to in Zambia and what exactly happened there. First off, let's figure out what China's even doing in Africa. To start with, it's the second largest continent on the planet, covering an area of 11.7 million square miles. That means it's packed with massive reserves of resources. For example, 74% of all the diamonds mined on our planet come from here. Plus, the continent holds over 50% of the world's cobalt and manganese reserves. Cobalt is one of the most important elements in today's world, especially with the growing number of green energy generators like wind turbines and solar panels. And what does this metal have to do with it? The answer is simple: batteries. Manganese is another metal used in green tech, and more than half of the world's supply is concentrated in Africa. Africa also holds 92% of the world's platinum group metal reserves, 36% of global chrome reserves, 22% of the world's bauxite, 13% of all vanadium, and much more. The continent is rich in elements used in making pretty much everything, from everyday consumer goods to telescopes that help us get a closer look at the light of distant stars. Do you honestly believe China would just walk past a treasure trove like this? Let's be real. This is the country that burns through more resources than any other nation on Earth. That's why China has stretched its mega project tentacles all over Africa, moving at top speed. Imagine, back in 2006, there were just a few mining and processing sites in Africa. Fast forward 9 years to 2015, and the numbers were shocking because there were already 120 of them. Here's a chart to give you an idea of how fast China's been expanding across Africa. And here's a map that makes it clear that almost the entire southern region is now in China's signature red, as every country here has received at least one project in mining or processing. There's, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. It has huge cobalt reserves which have drawn China's close attention. Now China's the main investor in 15 out of 17 mining companies extracting this resource in the DRC. One of them is the Daziwa copper-cobalt mine, which started operations in January 2020. It's estimated that, in the end, it'll yield about 4.6 million tons of copper and 420,000 tons of cobalt. China is also eyeing African lithium. To be more precise, Zimbabwean. In early 2025, Chinese companies signed a deal with Zimbabwe's state-run Kuvimba Mining House, which involves carrying on with a $270 million lithium mining project. They're also looking forward to building a lithium concentrator with a capacity of 600,000 tons a year at one of the mines. It's important to point out that the country already has a lot of Chinese facilities handling lithium processing. For instance, Chinese companies have set up a number of plants, which resulted in a big increase in the concentrate exports to China. Between August and November 2023, the amount of concentrate shipped grew nearly fivefold, reaching 177,000 tons compared to 38,000 tons in the same period of 2022. The desert Namibia hasn't escaped China's attention either, as it has large uranium reserves. The Chinese have built the Husab uranium mine in the country. It's one of the largest in the world, with a potential of 6,800 tons of uranium oxide per year. Overall, you get the idea. China is actively extracting resources from Africa through a huge number of large and expensive projects. However, sometimes environmental disasters happen during the extraction or processing. For example, that's what happened in Zambia, which we talked about at the very beginning. First of all, the country has huge copper reserves, which of course couldn't help but attract China. A Chinese company, Sino Metals or Sino Metals Leach Zambia, appeared in Zambia. It's involved in a vertically integrated business, including mineral resource development, mineral processing, and sales. The company's main product is copper, and there are huge reserves of it in Zambia. But if you think the Chinese set up a mine in the country and are extracting the metal the old-fashioned way by digging, blasting, and all that, you're wrong. It's not that simple, because the plant uses hydrometallurgy for copper extraction. The process is quite complex, so I'll try to explain it in simple terms. First, the company Sino Metals discovers copper ore, collects it in dumps, and then through chemical reactions with acids turns it into something that's then sent to China or sold within the country. During the process, highly toxic wastewater is formed containing concentrated acid, heavy metals, and dissolved solids. Obviously, you can't just dump all this somewhere, so a special tailing storage is created. Since the waste is liquid, Sino Metals created something like a reservoir. It's a dam, a place to store the liquid, but the liquid isn't water, it's a highly dangerous acid you should really stay away from. However, as it turned out, there's no need to get close to the toxic liquid in the tailing storage might escape, causing a disaster. The Chinese leaching facility had been working fine for a while, but then came February 18, 2025. At one point, there was what they call a failure in the containment structure. In simple terms, the dam that was holding all the acid in the tailing storage collapsed, fell apart. Well, you get it. As a result, 13.2 million gallons of acid spilled out from the storage. It wouldn't be so bad if there was nothing nearby, some plain, a valley, or something like that. This event is rightfully called a major disaster for Zambia because right next to the tailing storage is the Kafue River, the very same main waterway of the country. Once the 13.2 million gallons of acid got into it, just a few hours later, it brought horrific consequences. After just one night, about 62 miles downstream from the mine, you could notice dead fish washed up on the shore. The birds also became victims in this story. They didn't die, of course, just disappeared. I'm not exactly sure if that's how it really was, but that's what the witnesses say. In the end, on a certain stretch, the river just became dead, a waterway where there's absolutely nothing. Drinking water from there is now simply dangerous, and this is clearly upsetting the Zambians. To be more precise, we're talking about over 10 million people living in the river basin. Because of this, there could be a water crisis in many cities in Zambia, like the capital, Lusaka. There's no data on the consequences for this city yet, but it's likely we'll hear about it soon. However, we already know that the nearby city of Kitwe, with a population of about 700,000, has been seriously affected. They've completely cut off the water supply. Remember that Kafue is not just a source of drinking water, but also a waterway where more than 10 million Zambians get water for irrigating crops. So the Ministry of Water Development and Sanitation of Zambia announced that the devastating effects of the acid spill, in addition to the loss of many animals, include the destruction of crops along the riverbanks. This means the disaster completely wiped out two main uses of the river: no more drinking water from Kafue and no more water for irrigation. Zambia's industry isn't exactly something you'd find in every city, but it's still there, and just like agriculture, it uses water from the Kafue. Industry also can't use acidic water, so in theory, factories might stop running. Moreover, the same Ministry of Water Development and Sanitation of Zambia hasn't really reassured people in other areas of the country that weren't completely dependent on Kafue. Water from the river is a way to replenish groundwater which lies underground and can be used far from the spot where Kafue replenishes it. For now, of course, no one has accurately assessed the level of contamination in the underground water, but there's still a risk that even remote areas no longer have a safe water source. If anyone still doesn't realize how massive the disaster at the Sino Metals site was for Zambia, there's information about how the government tried to fix the situation. As soon as it learned about the accident, the country's Air Force took to the skies, dropping hundreds of tons of lime into the Kafue River to neutralize the acid. Boats were also used for the same task, moving up and down the river. What about Sino Metals? Of course, there was a reaction. It's hard to imagine there wouldn't be when such a disaster happened due to the company's fault. A representative of the Zambian government said that Sino Metals would cover the cleanup costs. Another representative, this time from the company itself, met with the government and apologized for the acid spill, saying that this is a big concern for Sino Metals and the entire mining industry. He also stated that everything will be done to restore the affected environment as quickly as possible. Is this a relief for Zambia? Maybe just for the government, which won't have to spend money on dealing with the aftermath. But for ordinary people, the river has become a source of water that's simply too dangerous to use for anything. And that's very hard to change. Overall, the Zambians are unhappy, especially since the country's already in a poor state. Water pollution with acid, it's definitely a huge problem. But it wasn't exactly known for being clean before. In 2020, a study showed that 75% of water stored in households in Zambia was contaminated with E. coli, leading to frequent diarrhea and poor nutrient absorption. This, in turn, caused high levels of stunted growth in children and widespread poor academic performance. On top of that, the country hasn't fully recovered from the cholera outbreak, which affected over 21,000 people and claimed around 700 lives. The country often faces a shortage of water overall. In 2019, 2.3 million people were close to starving because of a severe drought caused by a decrease in rainfall. This severely affected the southern and western provinces of Zambia, where maize is cultivated. As a result, a ban on maize exports was introduced. Just recently, in 2024, Zambia fought the consequences of a drought that devastated agriculture and left millions of Zambians facing food insecurity. For instance, maize was affected again. Government reports showed that nearly half of the 5.4 million acres of crops were lost. All of this despite the fact that before the start of the 2024 crisis, from October 2023 to March 2024, 58,000 people were in an emergency situation and 1.9 million people were in a crisis. Out of 76 assessed areas, 67 were identified as crisis hotspots. But let's go back to China and its activities on the African continent. The negative consequences for Zambia don't stop with the disaster at the Sino metal site. For example, on Chinese copper mines in Zambia, many people believe that safety rules have long been ignored. Even after the accident at the Sino metals mine, nothing changed. Although logically it should have. Just a few days after the disaster, another leak was found at a small copper mine. This time it wasn't as big, so they tried to cover it up. Guess it didn't work out since you're hearing about it now. At yet another Chinese mine, things played out like a scene from a horror film. According to local police, a miner died after falling into acid, and the mine kept operating after the authorities told them to stop. Even if we imagine that none of those incidents with Chinese mines in Zambia ever happened, Zambians would still have a biased attitude toward facilities owned by Chinese companies, at the very least because in other African countries, Chinese companies have already built mines that, while not causing massive disasters, have still had serious consequences for locals and wildlife. So, for example, in 2024, news broke that gold mines in northern Niger, run by a Chinese company, were ordered to shut down. Local herders pointed at the mines, seeing them as the only reason their animals were dying. They noted that the area wasn't suffering from drought or any epidemics, so the blame fell on the Chinese sites. And to be fair, the herders have a point. The Chinese company Sahara Sarl started gold mining right in the middle of their pastures, where there's hardly any natural watering places, so the animals drink whatever they can find. Unfortunately for them, that meant drinking from water sources connected to the groundwater near the Chinese mines, and those mines use all sorts of chemicals, which then end up in that very same nearby water. So yeah, once again, no safety standards whatsoever. In a normal, reasonable situation, the waste should obviously be transported to a safe disposal site, but here it just ends up in the surrounding soil. The good news for Niger is that the Chinese mines have finally shut down, so the locals, already shaken by the deaths of their animals, could breathe a sigh of relief. You know what's another big problem in Africa, besides the constant Chinese expansion that often leads to various incidents? Illegal mines, where, though not on a massive scale like in Zambia, serious environmental disasters still happen. Mali stands out in this regard. It's one of the poorest countries in the world, where people live in conditions totally unfit for a normal life and are always looking for ways to make money. At the same time, Mali is also a country with large gold reserves. As of December 2024, Mali had 800,000 metric tons of gold. Naturally, many people see this as a way to make money and head to completely illegal mines set up by slightly more enterprising folks looking to cash in on those desperate for income. The mining methods in such cases are crude, safety rules are ignored, and the mines aren't built to be safe for workers. As a result, accidents happen all the time. For example, this happened on February 1st, 2025. The gates of the mud storage facility broke, sending a rush of water into the tunnel. Men, women, and even children were there, all digging together, hoping to find traces of gold. The result, 13 prospectors lost their lives. Later reports surfaced that the death toll had actually reached 48. If you really want to understand how far people will go to find any job, no matter how risky, just consider that nobody even noticed that a year before all this, the same region had already seen a horrifying disaster. A landslide brought down a tunnel at a gold mine, leaving more than 700 dead. Then, after the incident in 2025, there was another one where 40 people died. This time, people went into open quarries left by industrial miners to search for pieces of gold. In the end, the ground collapsed. The government reacted to all these accidents and made its move to prevent them. It banned the issuance of new permits for foreigners to engage in small-scale mining. One could argue that this move is pretty useless since it's the locals who actually do the mining. However, in reality, those so-called illegal mine operators can actually be completely legal. Foreign companies see Mali as a place where they can set up a mine, hire workers for next to nothing, and not spend on ensuring safe conditions. And that's how mines with all sorts of accidents come to be. There's no sign of stopping the Chinese activity with all its negative consequences and tragedies from illegal mining, because unfortunately, this is exactly how African countries and their people make the money they need.